Well, start your introduction. Is it where you? Okay. Okay.
Okay, you can start that.
Yeah.
My other problem is my memory now. What really, I may have times and places and people I get mixed up sometimes, but sometimes to my advantage too. But anyhow, I appreciate Mike and your friends for inviting me, and it's my honor. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I suppose I'll tell you about my childhood. I had a wonderful childhood. I was born March 27, 1924 in Florence, Colorado. Of 10 children, 7 girls and 3 boys. And that was another handicap of 7 girls. Yeah. There were 4 younger and 3 older. And my grandparents lived with us until they both passed away. And had a large family. And we were poor. We lived on the edge of town, had 12 acres, and about half of it was irrigated. We grew and all kinds of vegetables and everything. We had a outside cellar, like walking into Walmart, because there was everything from sauerkraut to canned fruit and vegetables, lard and everything. We had most time 2 cows. We raised hogs, 30, 40 chickens all the time. We made our own butter and cottage cheese. And my granddad was more or less in charge of the livestock, and he done all the milking, and he was my buddy, my granddad, and I followed him around and helped him when I was real little, I remember. But he took care of the chickens, the pigs and everything, and like I say, we had a big family, but we never went hungry. But it seemed like everyone was poor then, so we didn't know the difference, I guess. But even a lot of the richer people were poor, you know, but it was all in the same basket, more or less. But we had lots of food. I ate better then than I do today, probably, as far as eating, you know, as far as food. And we all had a little responsibility. Like I say, I helped my granddad when I was small, I remember. And I brought the wood and the coal in for a heating stove and a cook stove, and that was a daily chore most of the time. And everybody had a little responsibility. And then in the summertime, we worked in our own garden a lot, quite a bit, and then if we had time, we'd go work for the neighbors who had farming and everything else. And there wasn't much money to have, but there was a lot of trading went on, you know, because we had lots of extra eggs, and we raised a few pigs and traded pigs and eggs, you know, for neighbors. But like I say, there wasn't much money ever involved. But most of the time, all the children, and particularly smaller ones, except my oldest, my brother was the oldest and the oldest girl. Most of us were all at the supper table every night and ate together. I had a wonderful father. He never touched one of us kids that I know of, but he was the boss, and I kind of like to be after him, but things happened that changed that. I don't know what it was since I got married. But he was a wonderful father, and he took care of his family. He worked in the early days, in the 20s and early 30s. He worked at the Continental Oil Refinery in Florence, which is now moved in Commerce City. That was in Florence in 1936 it was moved. But when it shut down, he went to work in the coal mine. And my brother also, my brother was 16 when he went in the mine, and we all worked, like I say, in summertime for neighbors and so on. And as time went on, we found odd jobs wherever you could. And later in when, see, I was telling you about that wheel up here that don't work sometime. Well, it was before the war. I went to work in a chicken hatchery where they, of course, hatch chickens. And then I went to work for myself part-time. And then when the war broke out, I was working there then, and some buddies of mine I raised with, we went to work at Fort Carson and later at Peterson Field. And most everything was rationed: tires, gasoline, sugar, coffee, had to have stamps. And 62.5 cents an hour, digging footers for all the buildings. No backhoes, and it was all dug by hand. And then I went from there to Peterson Field and worked at, when they was building it, the cement finisher helper, made 90 cents an hour. Boy, that was a lot of money then, I tell you. And then after that, a lot of my buddy and I, a lot of our friends were already gone our age and in that era, same age group. And 3-4 months went by, and I wonder where, gee, all our friends are gone. Why, I wonder how come they haven't called us. And we waited another month or two, and one Saturday we took off from work and went to Canyon Courthouse, or at the draft board in Canyon City, and asked the guy, you know, he wanted to know who we were, and so, and took our name, and he looking at the book and turning pages, turning. He said, "What are you guys doing here?" Well, we were asking. He said, "You should have been gone like 3 months ago." Well, we're still here, and come to find out, there was about 5 or 6 people in the county. There was us. There was 2 or 3 from Florence, and the rest were from Canyon, that somehow they missed and never got drafted then. But there's about 5 of them. And then he said, well, I don't know what, that was like a Saturday, but he said, like, next Monday, Tuesday morning, you be here at 8 o'clock in the morning, nothing but the clothes you wear. That's all you're allowed to have. And catch a bus. Okay. We were there and came to Denver. It's the first time I ever been to Denver in my life too. And we came to Denver at Fort Logan, and life changed considerable. But got a nice haircut, clear to the bone, you know, and a physical and a few shots, and they trying to learn us a few simple things, you know, but we was there only about 4 or 5 days. Oh, they gave us some new clothes, nothing fit, of course, but we went from there, we got on the train, went to Camp Roberts, California. At that time it was the largest training center in the United States. From 30 to 40, 50,000 troops there at one time. 13 weeks basic training period. And of course, the first 2 days there's just learning, you know, how to make the bed, and then so on, and roll your field pack, and how and what this is for, and introduce you to different people and things you're supposed to do, sergeant so and so, and just a few, not much of anything went on, but things changed considerable real fast. You know, we found out who was the boss really, but we learned all from gas mask. We had the .03 rifle at that time, but we learned gas mask, compass readings, and how to pack and then hike. And then it picked up business real fast. Every place you went, you double time. Run, run, run. If you went to chow, you run. If you went back, you run. Run, run, run. And the rifle range was like 5 miles from Camp Roberts, and that was every day for 3 weeks to the rifle range, back and forth. And the parade ground, then back in the parade ground, push-ups and run, push-ups and run. And gas mask training and everything else, compass reading and so on. And for 13 weeks, and the last week, we got to bivouac for a week. Yes, about a week, up in the hills. And it was 28 miles. Took us 2 days to get out there. Went about 12, 14 miles the first day. Dug in. It was little tents. It took two to make this little tent. Two of you had half, and your buddy had the other half. But put the tent in, and of course you had to dig in to start with, and then put up the tent. And then the next day we went and followed up to where we were supposed to go, and we take night courses and compass readings at night time. We lost half the time, everybody. And then it started to rain, of course. And after a week or 10 days we was there, they woke us up at about midnight. Be ready to move in about 15 minutes. We'll tear the tent down in the rain, make your pack, and get all ready. And it was 28 miles to camp. And in 8 hours and 20 minutes later, we went into camp. In the rain, in the mud, and guys, you went in the barracks and just fell on the floor. You know, it was on a Sunday morning, and you couldn't, half of the people couldn't get off the floor, including myself. But they served breakfast all day that day for us. But got to take a shower, and we got the day off. And then after that, we was there for about another week or so, and we got on the train and went to Fort Ord, California. And then Fort Ord, we got new uniforms, and we got new combat boots and the M1 rifle. And we done exercise and took the rifle apart and for every day 3 or 4 times and learned how to operate it and so on. And all we done was exercise and run and exercise and run and take the rifle apart again and so on, you know. And then about 4 or 5 days later, we got on the buses and went to San Francisco. Got on the biggest ship I'd ever seen in my life. It looked like a building. And it was a USS Grundy made by Kaiser, Henry Kaiser, the auto industry man. But there was 5,000 and over 5,200 of us on. When you walked up the gangplank, you got a number, and the guy said, "You two follow me," and he'd take it so and so, and you two go him, back and forth, and lead you to where you had to go downstairs, what deck you was in. And like I said, it was over 5,000 on that ship. And we down towards the bottom. And after the 3rd or 4th day, it got kind of raunchy down there, boy, and all over really. But you got 2 meals a day. They started like 5:30 in the morning. You got a sandwich of peanut butter, jelly, and a fruit, a banana, orange, and an apple, or whatever you wanted. And they only had 2 meals, same in the afternoon. 18 days later, we landed in Noumea, New Caledonia. And that was a big melting pot, Marines, Navy, Army, that whoever needed replacement troops, wherever in all the islands scattered out the Pacific, they sent word we need, 100 Marines or 100 Navy to go to certain places. And we was about a week. While I was in, kind of interesting, the last few days we just kind of bummed around waiting because we knew it was getting shipped out. we're walking down the beach, and they found a piece of driftwood about 3 feet long, and they had a piece of back chalk, and they stuck it in the sand on a post, and they had cut it like an arrow pointing out over the ocean, and it said Oklahoma City, 13,247 miles, and a half mile or something. But I never will forget that, son. I wish I had a picture of that. But anyhow, we got on another Liberty ship that time and went to Guadalcanal. And I never seen such a muddy, dirty place in my life. The Marines took an awful beating there, really did. But after a few days in Guadalcanal, the rain, and it finally struck me. I was homesick. And I didn't know where I was, or how far, or where my folks were. Yeah, I just plain homesick. But after a while, I kind of got used to it. We replaced the 1st Marines there. They'd done left for New Britain. And we kind of learning. I was assigned as the 1st scout and took scouting lessons, you might say, with a Fiji Islander that they trackers and so on. And we run perimeter clear around Henderson Field. The Seabees are still working on Henderson Field there. And we run patrols clear across behind it for several miles and in the hills beyond it and staying overnight sometime. But then we loaded up and went to the island of New Britain, Cape Gloucester. And the 1st Marines had just left there and went to R&R, another place somewhere. And then Cape Gloucester, I got hurt there and went to New Guinea, Finchhaven, New Guinea, in the hospital. Well, to get there, I was they put us on a plane, about half a dozen of us, an old C-47. Australian sergeant was flying the plane. I thought that was kind of odd. I thought maybe mechanic, but he was the pilot also. But we got about 50 yards down the runway and blew a tire. So it took us off, went back to the headquarters hospital. They flew another tire in. The next day they loaded us up. They strapped her out on the side. They stripped those old C-47 and they put kind of brackets on the wall, and they just hang you on that bracket and strap you in in a stretcher, you know. And the second day got about the same place, and the right engine started smoking and blew up. So here come another mechanic from Australia next day, and they worked on it all that night and the next day. And the third day, they hauled us off again. Boy, I gave a few Hail Marys then, you know, 3 times. But no problem, went to Finchhaven. That was a major, big hospital from all over the Pacific that they would bring in on airplanes and boats. Enormous, all tents, of course, but row after row after row for half a mile or longer. And anyhow, they separated the critical. They put them on plane to Hawaii or Australia or even to the States, and then the next critical and so on. But I was there for about 5 weeks, I guess, trying to figure out how to get people back to their unit that were there. And finally they got on, there was about 40, 50 of us, I guess. They called us out, got on 3 Higgins landing craft. They said it was about 60, 70 miles from Finchhaven to Cape Gloucester in those landing craft. Got a little rough water, but made it. All they had was just a compass, you know. They had extra fuel with them. And they dropped us off, and we thought something was very funny. There were no patrols, no guards at nighttime, about midnight, and nobody out here. We landed there. Where's everybody at? And it was about a half a mile up the beach to where we know we're supposed to be, and we knew where it was at. And that's odd, no patrol out there. Went up there and nobody was home. Nothing, absolutely nothing. What the heck happened? But Higgins boats, they done took off and went back to New Guinea. And there we sat for...
That's the Navy for you.
Yeah, we sat there for, I really don't know how long, 5, 6 months or so. Never heard a word from no one. There was about, I don't know, probably 55, 60 of us. And we sat there and sat there and sat there. Of course, when they left the 160th Infantry, the battalion, they had a ration dump like a pyramid when it was there of all the sea rations. And it was higher than a 2-story building, you know, tons and tons of sea rations. And then they would be broken cases. Of course, they wouldn't take them. And there was probably 2 or 3 ton of broken cans of sea. Well, that's what we lived on most of the time while I was there, sea ration. Pork and beans, English style stew, and hash. That was for, and the natives would give us fish, or once in a while we fish for ourselves too. But that's what we lived on. But pork and beans was the #1. You could get 10 hash for 1 pork and bean if you wanted them, you know. but
Dad, what about the turkey that you found?
well, one of the guys we had, he went out. We had our own patrol system. There was a native village about a half a mile on each side of us, and they were kind of our watchmen too. We had our own. There was no officers, and we had one buck sergeant from the Air Force was there. What he was doing there, I don't know, but nobody else. He got mixed up with us. But the rest of us were all infantry, and wasn't a non-com officer in the but we kind of figured out, you know, we'll set up down here and other bunch, and then we had one group inland about a half a mile, and the natives they kind of played guard duty for us because you could hear those drums, and they talked at night time. You could hear it through the jungle, one village talking to another one, and just an echo clear off in the far, and they communicated that way. Emergencies and one thing and another. I guess the way they and how they done it with the drums, you know, if they were having a powwow or something, or big feast, why they'd communicate with other villages there. But anyhow, we had this one kid. He went out. 2 of them went out part way in the jungle, and he come dragging a turkey back, he said. And that thing, dragging it looked like a turkey. It was bigger than a turkey. Enormous thing. Well, when they left the company, they left part of everything that was torn like tents. That's what we stayed in. Old had a rip in them, they'd leave them there. And the mess hall, they left a big old meat grinder, a big 2-handed job, laying there. These guys, they brought this turkey back. So, well, they skinned that thing and drained it and got it out, and had turkey legs as big as your arm. That damn thing don't look like a turkey, you know, and the way it does, no, I don't know. But anyhow, we tried to fry some of it in a mess gear, you know, and that didn't work too good. You couldn't eat it. And we put some in that big grinder, going to make hamburger out of it, turkey burger. You wind that thing up and turn it loose, and then go backwards, you know, just like grinding up an inner tube. But anyhow, after I got home, I had an encyclopedia, and I got to looking in that thing, and there it was, a buzzard. But it was odd because how I recognized it had 2 claws forward and one claw backwards. It only had 3 claws, and there it was, that buzzard. But you couldn't eat it, I know that. But anyhow, one day after we was there, somebody hollered ship. You know, we looking for ships all the time, and once in a while an airplane would go over, way up high. But one day somebody said, "Hey, a boat looks like come," and sure enough, 2 LSTs came up, loaded us up like they knew we was there. I guess how they knew, I don't know, but we loaded up on those 2 LSTs and headed for the Philippines. But of course, I missed the invasion of Luzon, and the good Lord was with me a lot of times, and I tell him that every morning too. I really appreciate the things he done for me. But
Excuse me, Royal, how were you wounded?
we was taken in Cape Gloucester when we was first there, about 15 miles up from Gloucester. They wanted to make sure I run a line across about 20 miles inland. Of course, Rabaul was at the upper end, the largest natural seaport in the Pacific, and there's about 30,000 Japanese there, plus their fleet, main part of their fleet, and their air force. They had a big, quite an air force there, and we was going to set up and make sure there was no Japanese coming through. And I was on a Higgins boat, and I was a front gunner on the right side, and there was one on the left side. No. Well, anyhow, and then there was 2 30 calibers behind you, and they would only traverse so far, so they wouldn't shoot you in the back, of course. But I loaded that thing up. We was about 1,000 yards or overall. Okay, commence firing, and pick out anything off of the beach that you could think. And the first round, nothing happened. I half loaded, put her back in, and it blew up on me. And it blew the whole top cover off, and it saturated my stomach and my thigh with brass. And got on the beach, and the medic and another guy, they helped me, and there was 2 more the same way. But there's something else, you know, a lot of unsung heroes in that war, and the medics were there. They were all heroes. Every one of them was the medics. But anyhow, that's when I got hurt, and then we got another landing craft that late at night and took us back down to Gloucester and then to the hospital, yeah. But then, like I say, I missed landing on Luzon. I missed the landing on Panay, but I got in on the last of Panay there. And then from Panay, went across to the island of Negros. And then the Japanese, they knew they lost the war, and they retreated pretty easy. And then let the Philippine Army take over, and they're good soldiers, those Filipinos, boy, I tell you. But anyhow, we started taking amphibious training for the big one. And we took amphibious training day and night, rough weather, every kind of ship that was made, round the clock. It'd wake you up at night time, get in a Higgins boat, go out and pick up another ship, Dutch, English, victory ships, old freighters, anything that floated. There was hundreds and hundreds of ships out there, and amphibious training around the clock, rain, snow, or shine. And that's what we was doing when the war ended. And then we went back to Panay, and they started discharging. How they discharge you, probably some of you know, it was by you had points by the amount of months you put in the service. You got points for overseas service, and same way with your pay. You got extra pay for overseas, and you got $5 a month for a combat zone if you're in a combat. And like if $50, why you got $5 for overseas and $5 for combat. That means $60 a month. big raise. But anyhow, you had so many points for total months of service. If you were married, you got points overseas. If you had children, and you had to have like 85 or 90 points to go home first, and that's the way you went home. But I liked, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 points. I haven't enough, so they sent part of our regiment and picked the older guys out that had experience more or less for the occupation and take over all the municipalities in Korea, and wound up in Korea. And then I got malaria then. I started malaria. We took a salt tablet every morning, usually had a little case. We carried a salt tablet and I was going to say Viagra, oh geez. It was Atabrun tablet. That was for malaria. Boy, I screwed up, boy. Anyhow, we took one. When we went to Korea, well, we quit taking that stuff, and then malaria broke out. Oh boy, sick and sick and sick. And from there, finally, I was on a ship, on a victory ship that headed for the United States. And I was in sick bay most of the time. On the way home, I'd get up and then go back to bed. And anyhow, announcer came on. Everybody wants to get up and look out, see what you see. Lights. Portland, Oregon. Boy, what a beautiful sight. But anyhow, they wouldn't let us dock. We sat out there all night. That was Christmas Eve, 1946, 45, Christmas Eve. And the next morning, a little boat come out, and 2 guys came on dressed up. They left, and about an hour later, here come another little boat. They brought a stretcher, and on the way home, there was another kid in another little, well, they didn't, it was a victory ship, of course. It wasn't for a lot of people, you know, but they just crammed us wherever they could find a place. And it was kind of a closet deal where they stored stuff. And he was in there, and I was across the hall. But I knew, I heard him in there, and the guy's going to attend to him. I knew he was sick. But they come on with a stretcher, and they took a body out, and come to find out that kid died on the way home. But they didn't know, they quarantined us because they didn't know if he smallpox or what he had. So, but to come to find out he was just malaria, died from malaria. And anyhow, they let us off that night. Oh, they brought out Christmas dinner to us before that same day, Christmas Day. They brought our Christmas dinner out to us. And of course, everybody got dysentery, you know. Oh boy, terrible, terrible. When I went overseas, I weighed 154 pounds. I came back, I weighed 127. And then back home on the train and back home. I got discharged January 1946, yeah. So that's, any questions?
Well, you were in Korea when they dropped the atomic bomb?
No, that was
No,
after the
that was
war.
before, yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
What happened in Korea is the Soviets had actually came down through Manchuria, through Korea.
Right.
And as part of the Potsdam Agreement, there was agreement to split Korea between us and the Russians. So, but we had no troops in Korea at all. It was strictly the Russians. So that's why they rushed units as soon as the war was over into Korea, into the southern part, so the Soviets wouldn't keep going.
Mike, could you show the one picture of my father with the Korean?
Yes. Well, there was an infamous machine gun that blew up in
So
your
what part
father's
of it blew
face.
up? What blew up?
Probably, I mean, if anything blows up, it's kind of where the bullet ends up going into the chamber. So it probably was all of that.
Of course, the gun is sitting up here, you know, and it discharged back this way, and the top went the other way, yeah, okay. But to finish this,
Well, we ought to talk that one. What's that picture?
This picture is my father right here, and the gentleman next to him, his name is Charlie Machichi, and my father's best friend. About a year or so ago, my dad says, "Hey, you think Charlie Machichi's around?" And, you know, the good grace of the internet, my wife typed it in, and we found him, and it was in St. Louis, but I called him, but he had passed away, and I talked to his wife, and he had a son who was about my age, and this summer my wife and I went and saw Charlie's son, quite a reunion, so it was very nice, yeah, so. He's a police officer. Charlie was a police officer also in St. Louis also, so.
after I got home, the more I had malaria off and on, and it kept getting farther apart for next 2 years or so, but it kind of faded away. I went, my dad and I and older only brother, we went in business for ourselves, insulating homes and hauling produce to Kansas, Nebraska. And one day I wandered around in Canyon City and driving around, and this cute little old 17-year-old girl kind of, you know, smiled at me. And well, I stopped and talked to her because, you know, she was all grins. But after going on 78 years, she's no 17-year-old girl, but she's still pretty. Yeah, then that's her sitting back there.
Is that how you remember it?
He said he went to a yard sale and bought a lawnmower for my dad. My dad filled me in with a lawnmower.
Yeah.
That's his story.
I finally got rid of the lawnmower. But anyhow, that's, any more questions?
How easy was it for you to come back and reintegrate into, you know, the normal society after everything you experienced?
It wasn't no, I don't think, no, it wasn't no trouble. I don't know. Of course, you know, living in rural areas in those days, I think it was a lot easier during the Depression for people who lived in rural areas than it was in the big cities too. You know, you had your own groceries, you might say, and people were close and used to doing without. But I think it made a lot of character, I think, you know, and even after, and it made, I think, a lot of difference in the military. I think it built character to be poor and have to think on your own more or less a lot of times too, you know. But I can't say I had any trouble, no. I never bought any. And only know of one that really did. Of course, he had a mental problem a little bit, but otherwise, I really don't know of any of my friends or anybody that really did have a whole lot of problem. But like I say, I think little difference the way you're raised and how you're raised, and the whole country, of course, was different, you know.
Mike, one last story. My father has some stuff over here, the samurai sword, but he had two swords, and about 30 years ago, we were looking at some of the memorabilia, and that sword was had a silk satchel around it, and it had the Colonel something Ito, and he lived in Sapporo, Japan. It was in English and in Japanese, and had his address. So my dad says, well, why don't you write that address? So, you know, first of all, we did some research on the sword, and I took it up to Boulder, and some samurai experts said it was hundreds of years old, it was priceless, and so on and so forth. And so I wrote this address, and I'll be darned, we get a letter back from Colonel Ito's wife. He had passed away, and he'd always thought about the sword, who took the sword, what happened to it, what happened to the young soldier that had the sword. And so we communicated back and forth. I called the embassy, and my father wanted to ship the sword back, but the Japanese government said, no, we won't take the sword back, we won't ship it, and so on and so forth. So they sent Mr. Ito's son, wasn't it, Dad? His son came over, and my father presented the sword back to the family about 30 years ago. So it was a very nice ceremony.
Nice sword.
If you had to do it all over again, would you join the Air Force?
The wax. Yeah.
How did you come by the swords? How did you come by the swords?
How'd you come by the swords, Dad?
The sword. In Korea, of course, the Japanese, they were moving them all back to Japan, and they'd get so many of them ahead of time, and when a boat would come in that was available, why, they was all they was allowed to take was so much money and personal belongings, but that's all they was allowed to take back to Japan. And a lot of them had a lot of items. And this Japanese, I thought he was a captain, I don't know. But anyhow, he gave me his sword, and we stacked them all up. And we had a captain who was in charge of us, our outfit. He was from Denver, Captain Warmouth, a real gentleman, real nice guy. He was one of us, the way you'd never know, he was one of the boys. And I asked him, I said, I got this sword, I said, from his Japanese captain. He said, got to take it home? He said, yeah, go ahead, take it home. So that's how I got it, yeah.
Now, Royal, your rank was a staff sergeant,
Yes.
so that would have meant you're like a squad leader at one point?
Yes.
When
Squad.
was that?
That was in Panay, because after all the injuries and so on, after Luzon and the invasion of Panay, why, there's several killed and a lot wounded. One out of every 7 or 8 were either killed or wounded, That was pretty much average, I think, in the whole area, the whole war. But I was one of the older guys then, because a lot of young replacement, and there was another private named Sanchez. That's a story in itself. Colonel Sanchez and I were 1st and 2nd scouts, and we got promoted. He got to buck sergeant, and I got promoted to kind of a field, the commission, not a commission, but a field promotion to staff sergeant squad leader, yeah, from there. I don't know if you want to know about Colonel Sanchez or not. He, when it was made up, the units were made up in Hawaii, the 40th Division, and before they all shipped out, this Bobby Sanchez, a little short Mexican kid, he was a dinger, boy, I tell you, full of fire, ornery little bugger. But anyhow, everybody got a pass for so many hours, had a pass for that day, but had to be in by midnight, and they're going to ship out any time, really. So him and his buddy go to town, and of course they hit the bars, and they hit too many of them, in fact, and they got separated, and Bobby, he was lost and didn't know where his buddy was, and he was just wandering around having a good time sightseeing, and he hit a few more bars by himself, and he walked into this novelty store or some kind where they had all kinds of military uniforms or buttons, and he went in and bought a set of Colonel Oakleaf, put one on his hat and one on his breast, and walked out on the street, and a couple of lieutenants come by and they saluted him. Oh, and that, and he made a habit. He'd call them across the street and make them salute him, you know. And he was getting pretty well inebriated, of course. And he run across these two. They didn't salute him, and he told them, oh, he said, that's all right. He said, anyhow, they got, where you guys going? He said, well, we're going to the officers' club. They got a dance going. He said, I'll go with you. Okay, so they went to the officers' club. They walk in, and he has a few more drinks. He has a dance or two, and he gets up on the stage all of a sudden, stop the music. Well, they thought something emergency happened. He said, my name is Colonel Sanchez. The drinks are on me. And about that time, a couple of MPs drug him off and put him in jail. But they called the headquarters and told him he was moving out. But from then on, it was Colonel Sanchez. Yeah, that's what he went by, Colonel.
Now, there's another picture we have up here. I don't know if you can see that. It looks like it was taken in Korea. Mark?
Yes, it
you?
was. Yeah. That, I believe that was at the police station when my father was stationed there.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was an interpreter, and that was Charlie Machichi on the left, his friend, and the other gentleman, I think, was his Jeep driver, he was saying.
Yeah,
They patrolled the railroad yards of Busan, is that the city?
Busan, yeah.
Let me just add one little explanation for what Royal was telling us all, in case a lot of this doesn't kind of make sense to you, is, in the war in the Pacific, there were two major thrusts toward Japan. The northern thrust was under the command of the Navy, Admiral Nimitz and crowd, and the Marines, essentially a Navy operation. The southwest part was under General MacArthur, and predominantly was an Army thrust. So when Royal was talking about the first deployment of the 40th Division, as he mentioned, initially they were out in Hawaii. They deployed down to New Caledonia, which was around down in this area, came up to Guadalcanal and relieved the Marines, again for the final mop-up operation. And by then the Marines were pretty beat up in any event. And then from there, the thrust for MacArthur ultimately was to come up to the Philippines. That's up here. Which meant you had to kind of work your way up through New Guinea. He wanted to take over Rabaul and things, and then further on up. And so it's kind of difficult to see a little bit, but this is the northern part. Whoops, no, the northern part of New Guinea was along through here. Here's Finch Haven, where again they had a large medical facility. This is where you were doing the kind of the hopping around. There were a lot of Japanese forces here, but what the approach used by MacArthur was you kind of skipped a bunch of them. And they'd be kind of like island hopping. And the Marines did that as well. But this was very nasty territory in here. This is New Britain. Cape Gloucester was right there. And the Bismarck Sea and Rabaul was over there. MacArthur really wanted to eventually take Rabaul, but ultimately the decision was to forego it. But this was just very nasty area up through here, and where Royal was talking about is they were operating like along in here, pushing the Japanese back through here, and part of what you talked about, creating a line across the island to kind of separate them. That's where, he was wounded again in one of the amphibious landings up through there. But everything you read about it gets very little highlight in the history of the Pacific War, but it was very brutal, nasty terrain, just totally jungle and stuff, and a lot of disease and stuff like that. When ultimately, what he is secondly talking, this is hard to see, you almost have to come up later on, but the final landings in Luzon initially were done through Lingayen Gulf and Bay through here. There's Manila. So once our forces they initially landed down further in the south to give us air bases and things. Major thrusts came in through here, pushing the Japanese up and down. And here's Panay, which is one of the islands the 40th eventually came down to after the liberation of Manila and stuff. And the fighting continued all the way to the end of the war. In fact, I think I remember back in the early 70s, there finally was the last Japanese soldier who had retreated up into the mountains, finally gave himself up. Finally, I guess, thought it was about time. But for a long time, there were a lot of isolated groups of Japanese up through the hills there who held out, and the Filipinos gladly routed them out. There was not a lot of good feelings at all, obviously. But again, it's just a marvelous story. And Royal, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And sharing that.
My
just
honor.
a little bit in appreciation, we would like to present you one of our challenge coins for the museum.
Oh, well, thank you.
Just thank you so much. It was just a marvelous story here.
Thank you.